You're listening to God, Law, and Liberty with David Fowler and Gary Humble. We're putting culture on a collision course with the truth.
Well, welcome to another episode of God, Law, and Liberty. I'm Gary.
And I'm David.
And, right before we started today's broadcast, David just prayed for us that God would, help us complete his intended purposes through our words. And so I'm sure part of that prayer was that I do not call anyone stupid on today's episode. But though that might be hard to do, we want.
That's my natural temperament, actually.
We want to talk about again. Every time if I feel like we have a topic to discuss, the issue of judicial supremacy will not go away, and so that will be somewhat still part of today's conversation. But we want to talk about our abortion bills that are going on here in Tennessee, and this week, the Governor Bill Lee, finally came out with his proposal on SB 2196, which is his heartbeat bill, and the Tennessee Senate Judiciary Committee heard that bill this week on Tuesday, actually. And we got some interesting details from that. David, you were there in the room there at the Capitol, and so would love to hear your insight. And we also have some clips that we're going to play back from that hearing and have a little bit of discussion on that.
Yeah, I bet you if we weren't trying to record a podcast, we could sit here and talk for a couple hours
without a doubt.
And we can't do that, so we'll try to be restrained and pick up if we need to next week, because the bill will actually probably be on the floor of the Senate Monday night or this week at least.
Really? That quick?
Yeah, that quickly. And the day this is airing, Friday, I will actually be meeting with the chairman of the House Health Committee to talk about the abortion legislation, because it has to go through the House too.
Right.
So we're at the very beginning. This is sort of the shot on Fort Sumter that took place in Tuesday in the Judiciary Committee, and we're far from having the end of this wawa.
One should hope so.
Yeah, we should hope so. But I want to say something. We want to talk about God, law, and liberty. And in the last several weeks, we've been talking mostly about law and sort of liberty, because that's what the abortion is rooted in, this concept of liberty of a woman. But I want listeners to hear a little personal side of all of this. I've been in state politics since my first session was 1995, 25 sessions ago. And I began, even in my first term, during those first 4 years, trying to put amendments to the state budget. Now, when I was there, the Democrats controlled both houses. And I would try to put language in the budget. I'd work with Bill Dunn, Representative Bill Dunn. We came in together. He's retiring this year. Now, I'll miss him. He's a good friend, a good legislator. To put language in the budget to strip out money going to pay for abortions. Couldn't get it done. Governor Sundquist would acquiesce to us putting it in, but literally the Democrats would not pass the budget if that language is in there. And so I started early on working on these life issues. Representative Dunn and I figured out a way to get that done, actually, during Bredesen's term, and we got some language passed actually in statutes.
So I'm just curious, back in that day, was there a Democratic majority in the Senate?
In the House and the Senate, right?
Really?
Until
when you started.
And when I left in 2006, Republicans held the majority in the Senate, 17-16. But Governor Wilder, a Democrat, was still the Speaker. One of the Republicans defected and voted for him as Speaker. So we were never really in the majority while I was there. And the House was still under the Democratic leadership for another, I think, 4 years or so. So we couldn't pass any legislation, but we did try to amend the budget language to make sure we couldn't use any of the money for abortions, and the Democrats would literally threaten to shut the state down if we left that language in there, and we'd recant and back off, and we would never force down the state to close over that issue. And so I've been working on this a long, long time. And then I was the first person when the Supreme Court of Tennessee ruled there was a right to abortion in the state constitution. I think I've shared this story. Judge Mickey Barker, the dissenting judge, called me. He was one of my constituents. We lived in Chattanooga. He said, meet me behind the bank building. I got to give you something. He handed me the opinion. Said, I wrote a dissent, but the Supreme Court of Tennessee found a right to abortion in the state constitution. I went up in my law office. I read the opinion and resolved then we need to amend the Constitution to fix this. It took 14 years for it to actually get through the ballot and passed. And then another couple of years for the Court of Appeals to uphold it as constitutional. So I've been at this a long time. And I thought we were on the cusp, and I'm not going to say that we're not, but on the cusp of really making a strong legal constitutional argument against abortion, rooted in precedent, not, well, science and data has sort of changed, or, well, this has gotten out of hand, like in Virginia, so we need to change the Supreme. I thought we really had a great chance to do that. We'd laid the testimony in August, and while I was frustrated with what happened in April previously when Senator Bell said we're going to have a study committee, we brought in Adam McLeod. We may hear some clips from him today. We brought in Richard Mast from Liberty Counsel to testify in support of it, and I testified in support of it. And I thought we'd really laid the foundation. The Senate asked me to draft a stronger bill to say we're convinced heartbeat bills are not constitutional. They're not going to affect anything. They're not going to lead to the reversal of Roe. But you've made an argument. Would you now make it the strongest and best you can?
I just want to clarify that point you just said. I mean, we did, because I remember I was in those hearings and I walked away really, really hopeful. And the consensus was from the entire committee and from all the testimony we had over those 2 days that a heartbeat bill in Tennessee just wasn't going to cut it.
Yeah.
And that was the culmination of the testimony that we heard.
Yeah, it's not going to be constitutional, so why are we bothering passing it? Why do it? We're just going to waste our money. So I redrafted the bill, gave it to the Chairman Bell, didn't know what he would do with it, never really heard back as to whether he wanted to make it the committee's bill, his bill. But we went ahead and got Senator Bowling to file it. We filed it as an amendment to Senator Pote's bill that we had actually been arguing over, to Senate Bill 1236. And then the governor made his proposal. And I'm grateful that we have a pro-life governor and he wants to address the issue. But the political reality is it completely undermined the Rule of Law Life Act. Legislators who
undermined the 2 days of study.
Well, it really did.
That we had done.
It basically said, we've heard all that testimony. We're going to do a heartbeat-related bill anyway. We're going to add a few other bells and whistles on it, but we're certainly not going to challenge, make any strong challenge based on legal precedent, constitutional arguments against Roe and Casey as being the law. We're going to try to get some things upheld, but we're not going to lay the axe to the root. We're still going to go to the Supreme Court and say, this is your baby. You get to decide, literally, this is your baby. You get to decide what kind of law we can have. We don't have any ultimate authority over this. We're not going to reclaim our authority over this issue that you usurped from us. Remember, that's what happened. The states were having laws. We had laws on abortion, and they were different laws in different states. Different states were doing different things. It's the way federalism works. And the Supreme Court said, no, this is a national controversial issue, and we're going to decide it, and we're going to come up with some constitutional reason. And because everybody believes the supremacy clause and the U.S. Constitution is supreme, y'all are going to all have to accept our reason, and we're going to put an end to this debate. Well, here we are 40 years later, and it didn't put an end to the debate. And I thought we had come up with a bill in the Rule of Law Life Act that would say, y'all really did mess it up, and now we're going to give you the precedent and the constitutional reasons you need. And all that testimony from Adam, which was beautiful, whether people understood it or not, I listened to it again the other day with a representative, and I almost kind of came to tears a little bit to say, that was so good. I don't know if people appreciate how good that was. I mean, it was, and the representative that was sitting there, when Adam said, he made a statement, I don't think we've got the clip on it. If we do, let me know. But he said, government is to secure our fundamental pre-political absolute rights and to prohibit those absolute wrongs. Some things are absolutely wrong, like murder. And when it fails to do so, its laws are not just. and they're not righteous. And I was sitting there, I was actually sitting there with Representative Jerry Sexton, who's pastored for a long time, a Southern Baptist church. And we just stopped there. And it was sort of, oh God, our laws are unrighteous and unjust. And the Supreme Court took away our authority to have just and righteous laws. And we're willing to leave that decision up to them. That's really the root of the issue. Will we reclaim our prerogative as a state and as legislators to weigh various policy considerations and decide when should the life of the unborn be protected and in what instances should it not be protected, if any, whatever they should be. And we're going to weigh those policy decisions rather than punt them to the Supreme Court. That's the issue the legislature really had in front of them. Now, we've got some clips on that, and I want to play them in just a moment, but I want to talk about the personal side of this. I came home, given that history of 20-something years of working on life, and I told a friend today, I said, if I was a recovering alcoholic, I would have been drunk. I was so, I don't want to say distraught, but it was like I just had my guts knocked out. And I realized that if we don't claim the right now to say we have the power and the authority to protect life from conception to its natural death by due process of law, we won't do it in my lifetime. Because once you argue that, well, can we stop it at the heartbeat? Can we stop it at 6 weeks? Can we stop it at 8 weeks? Can we stop it at 10 weeks? And what about 12 weeks? And what about 14 weeks? And what about 16 and 18 and 19 and 20 and 21, 22, 23 weeks? That's what the governor's bill is, this laddered approach.
Which we already made fun of last week.
That's right.
In Missouri.
Yeah, and that's what Missouri didn't go as far as
They
our
didn't
governor.
go as far.
Yeah, they did like 4 things and said that's enough.
Yeah. We did like 20.
But if you go to the Supreme Court and you lose that, and then you come back and say, well, we lost a heartbeat bill, let's do a conception bill. People will look at you like you have lost your mind.
Rightfully so.
Rightfully so. Now, I would say to them, well, here's the problem. We made the wrong legal argument last time. And this time we're going to make the right legal argument. And then they're going to look at the politician and say, well, you dummy, why didn't you make the right legal argument the first time? Why did we spend a couple of $1 million going up there to lose? If there was a better argument you might could have made, now you want to make it. Why didn't you make it then? And so I realized if this bill passes, it's not that some other state won't pass a bill and in my lifetime, Roe versus Wade won't be reversed. But it won't be reversed because of anything Tennessee did.
Tennessee won't do it.
Yeah, we won't do it.
Yeah.
And that was just sort of the, it's kind of like you get to the end of your life and you realize you're rich and you're dying alone. What was the point of all that? I've worked on this issue. So I want to share this. This is the God part of God, Law, and Liberty. The Lord brought this verse to my mind. I'll read the whole context. It's in 2 Corinthians 4. He says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed. That's the word I remembered. Perplexed, but not despairing. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying about in the body the dying of Jesus, so the life of Jesus may be manifested in our body. And when I read that, I thought, yeah, Christianity is not put on a happy face and everything's great in life and I'm just really glad like Job. My wife died, my cat died, the tornado knocked my house over, my car's been repossessed and I lost my job. My dad disowned me and disinherited me. Isn't life great? Sometimes you're just perplexed. I don't see God's footsteps because they're in the sea, and I can't see them. And as soon as I think I see them, the waves wash over them, and they're gone. And he says, but you are not despairing. Why? Because God Almighty, the sovereign God, knows exactly what's going on, and his superintending providence, words we don't hear much in our churches anymore, is saying, I will even use the evil and the wicked men to accomplish my purpose. I did that, remember, with the greatest evil that was ever done on the face of the earth, the people who killed my son. Peter said it was by the preordained, predetermined purposes and counsels of God from eternity that happened. They were evil, but you used their evil for good. And he said, so David, do not despair, because when you despair, you doubt my goodness. You doubt my sovereignty. You doubt my providence. I know exactly what I'm doing, and it may not be what you would want me to do. But will you leave that up to me? Maybe I don't want to pass this bill. Maybe I want to expose legislators. Maybe I want people in the body of Christ to think more deeply and to reconsider some things that they haven't thought about for a long time. Just who's in charge of the ship here? And are they going to be mad at legislators and then maybe realize, no, you're actually mad at me, aren't you? God says. If I'm sovereign, you're really mad at me. You're grumbling against me, just like the people of Egypt. And you know what? I'm going to let you wander in the Roe-Casey wilderness for another 40 years till this disbelieving generation dies out. That's my purpose, David. Now, I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying he gave me some revelation. But if that is his purpose, am I content with that? And I thought, so I'm perplexed. I have no idea what we could have done better, what we could have done more, what we could have said. And it was for naught, at least in my temporary, temporal, at the moment eyes. And I was perplexed. And to the point of despair, I literally got into bed that night. And I got up on my hands and knees and my face down on the bed, just kind of sitting there awkwardly. And I was just thinking, Lord, what am I supposed to think here? What's the point of this? And those things came to my mind. And I pulled out some stuff and began putting my focus on God. And what does his word say? He's at perfect peace, whose heart is stayed on all the situations and circumstances around him, right? No. Whose heart is stayed on me. Who am I, David? Remember who I said I was? I stretched forth my hand, and this is in our prayer alert. I want to read this verse, and I know we're getting way off subject of the law, but sometimes there are going to be people listening to this, and they're going to see what's happened, and they're going to be despairing too, just like I was. And, I had every right to despair, given my history. But this is something the Lord says. This is amazing. It's Isaiah chapter 14. And he's talking about what the Lord is going to do. And he says, surely, just as I have intended, so it has happened. And just as I have planned, so it will stand to break Assyria in my land. I'm going to do that. I'm going to trample him on my mountain. And then his yoke will be removed from them, referring to his people, his burden removed. This is the plan devised against the whole earth. And this is the hand that stretched out against all the nations. For the Lord of hosts has planned, and who can frustrate it? And as for his stretched out hand, who can turn it back? God's planned all things from the beginning. They don't happen because he's got a big mind and he can see into the future like Cosmos or whoever it was on Johnny Carson, that could sit there and read the cards. God said things happen because I've already thought them into existence. He said in Psalm 139, we love as Christians, I know the words on your mouth before they're yet there. I know your days. They've been numbered. And I actually really know every hair that will fall off the top of your head. And I know when they'll fall off and how they're going to fall off. And so for the non-Christian, you live in a life of despairing perplexity. And he was saying, but David, you do not. I got this. I'm your heavenly Father. I am actually using this, and you don't know it. I do more things. I can multitask, David, like you won't believe. I am using this to chisel you to understand the depth of your sin and distrust against my glory that's over all things. And I'm using that chiseling on you to chisel your place into the temple that I'm not just building in you, but the temple I'm building among all of my people. I came to build a church, not build a nation, not to pass a law. And when my people get chiseled and get put into the building right, the laws will take care of themselves. But I got to build my church first. And my church is in rubbles and ruins. And that's why we're in the situation that we're in.
Yeah.
It's not because the heathen are being heathen. It's because the church is not the church. Because we think that if we don't vote for this or we vote for that, that somehow we're going to win or lose an election, as if God isn't the one that could take us out in a moment's notice. We get all worried about, oh, how's this going to look during an election? As if somehow God's going to wring his hands that, well, somebody issued a mail piece on me and Representative or Senator so-and-so lost. Oh, my goodness, what am I going to do? What kind of God is that to believe in? So yeah, I was very perplexed. I'm still perplexed. But he said, keep your mind focused on who I am. And isn't it interesting? That's how Paul prays. He didn't pray about this, he says, I pray that you will come to know Jesus Christ and God. And the more you come to know of them, the more you'll find you change. The more you have peace, the more you're at liberty. You kill me, so what? I go to heaven. You criticize me, you hate me, you speak evil of me. That's good because the Lord's going to teach me about what things are most important. And he's going to further refine me and fit me for glory. So that's okay. Say whatever you want to say. It doesn't have to bother me and hate me. And I realized, I let it bother me too much. And he said, see, David, I'm teaching you something. So I'm at work. Don't worry about it. And so I just say all that because I know there are a lot of pro-life people that we've been dealing with who are frustrated, who feel helpless. That was the point of a commentary a couple of weeks ago. The guy said, if Clarence Thomas won't hear an appeal on a dismemberment abortion ban, where you literally at 14 to 15 weeks start tearing the arms and legs and the heads off of babies. If the Supreme Court, even Clarence Thomas, won't hear an appeal on that says that law is unconstitutional, what chance do we have, David?
Then you really better rethink how you're approaching the court.
Yeah, that's right. But I also need to think when I'm in despair, I need to think through the practical things, but I also need to remember God's in control.
Yeah.
There are bird seeds being dropped along the path here. And in that particular case, I think we talked about it, Clarence Thomas wrote an opinion to say, why am I not going to hear this case? I think you'd have it in front of us, and I'll read it. But here's what he said about the case out of Alabama. This case does not present the opportunity to address our demonstrably erroneous undue burden standard. You didn't give me a case that allows me to revisit this issue. Would you please send me a case that asks the right question? Until you do, even I won't hear it. And we asked the wrong question in the governor's bill.
And since you said that, can we just really quickly unpack what that means? Because we've had some discussion. I know you were doing a little bit of research this morning because, and I made some post earlier about, we've had 9 or 10, heartbeat bills pass over the last, there's been 105 heartbeat bills proposed in state legislatures since 2011, and 23 of them died in committee. 60 something of them didn't get passed. 2 got vetoed, and the 10 that did get enacted are blocked. So that's our history with this thing, and
that can lead to despair.
That can lead. That should. I mean, and you got to
make you revisit what are we doing wrong.
And so that, but even with this thing, we've had the bans on D&E and 15-week bans and all these fetal pain and all of these things die in the court. And the reason is, I don't care if you call it sex selection, genetic, race, heartbeat. Roe v. Wade is still a precedent in the court. And as long as that ruling is alive, all they look at is that viability standard. You cannot cannot put an undue burden on a woman to receive an abortion, pre-viability per their words, which is essentially about anything under 24 weeks.
Yeah.
The court has not upheld nada within that time frame. It doesn't matter what you call it.
That's right.
But here we are. We're just for some reason
we
banning every week.
You don't
up to 24 weeks.
Don't if you don't challenge the law. In fact, I think there is a statement in the 11th circuit case. Hold on, just a minute. Oh no. This was in Thomas's opinion last year, saying why we're not going to hear an appeal from the Alabama dismemberment abortion ban. Now, keep in mind the governor's going like 15 weeks, 18 weeks, 20 weeks, whatever it is.
Which we'll hear in a minute.
Yeah, and so a D&E is applied generally around 14 to 15 weeks is when you start doing dismemberments.
Because at that point, the baby is too big. Just
you can't suck it out so big. Right. And so the Alabama court, now this, if you got young children listening on the radio or something, you might want to turn the volume down for about 10 seconds. But here's how the 11th Circuit described what takes place. Under the act, now what Alabama said is, well, this is inhumane. So you need to kill the baby before you dismember it. So the court said, under the bill, you're required to kill the unborn child before ripping apart its body. Now, they were not being kind here because they saw what was taking place. And I won't even read some of the other ways they described how this takes place, but it's actually more inhumane than a partial birth abortion. Partial birth abortion, you penetrate the skull and it kills the baby. And then you remove the brain, collapse the skull, and you can remove the baby. Here, it says it really dies from suffocation and blood loss because you start tearing it apart. He said, just like any other person would die if you started doing this. So, in the hearing, deciding not to hear the appeal, here's what Clarence Thomas said. That we're in essence saying states are required to allow this kind of abortion. And he said, but under the undue burden standard adopted by this court, a restriction on abortion, even one limited to prohibiting gruesome methods, is unconstitutional if, quote, the purpose or effect of the provision is to place a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking an abortion before the fetus attains viability. Mm-hmm. Now, they just cited Whole Women's Health versus Hellerstedt, 2016, which is the case that's being reconsidered in the oral arguments that were taken this week.
Louisiana case.
And we talked about that. And what we talked about there was that the case that was just argued this week, June Medical Services versus G, it's a case out of the Fifth Circuit, the Supreme Court said, here's the question I want you to answer. They didn't say, does the law that was upheld in Louisiana violate, is Roe versus Casey the applicable standard? Everybody's arguing that is the applicable standard. It's just not an undue burden. So the court said, the only thing I want you to ask is whether or not the Louisiana law is more or less of an unburdened burden than the one in the Hellerstedt case. They're not going to revisit Roe. I saw something the other day, somebody sent me and said, well, the Supreme Court might reverse Roe and Casey because of this case.
There's no reason.
I had constitutional law professors say, no, they could actually uphold Hellerstedt and uphold but they're not going to address Roe and Casey because you didn't ask the right question. So when you go into legislation saying, we understand the Supreme Court gets to make this decision. We understand that in 1973, and since then, at least 7 judges have all said the state does not get to weigh these matters of pre-existing, pre-political rights to life and weigh all the competing issues and develop legislation to adequately protect life and liberty and property. You don't get to make those decisions. We do, and we're going to weigh them. That is an abdication of the legislature and the state's authority to protect absolute rights like life, liberty, and property and to make political policy weighing decisions to the United States Supreme Court. That's an abdication of our state's sovereignty. It's an abdication of our ability to do what under the law of God and nature we are required to do to have just laws, is to protect absolute rights.
And clearly from the testimony, at least that I heard on Tuesday, we are completely fine here in Tennessee with continuing to leave our policy decisions up to the court.
Play a couple of those. Here are a couple of excerpts
so here
from the testimony Tuesday, right?
Yeah, so right here we've got Senator John Lundberg, who is one of the co-sponsors of the governor's heartbeat bill, and he is laying out for all to hear some of the sections of the bill, and he's describing the fetal heartbeat and severability part of the bill. So let's take a listen.
And listen to the last words in particular.
Yeah, we're gonna key those in for sure.
Okay.
Requires a physician to determine the gestational age of the unborn child before performing an abortion, and creates a layered structure that prohibits abortion after the unborn child reaches certain gestational age milestone. Prohibits abortion of an unborn child at the following gestational age milestones: detection of a fetal heartbeat, 6 weeks of gestational age, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12, 15, 18, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Creates a Class C felony for a physician who performs an abortion in violation of these prohibitions. Next section, and this is an important part of Section 2, it prohibits abortion if it is because of the unborn child's race, sex, or Down syndrome diagnosis. This is known as a eugenics provision.
And now pay attention coming up here, because he's about to address severability. And listen to these words.
Okay, yeah.
Establishes a medical emergency exemption again in there. Section 3 states that all the provisions in this bill are severable, and that's in order to ensure that Tennessee has the most protective pro-life laws that the courts will allow.
Yeah, the most protective laws. That's so we're on a good track there so far.
Yeah,
we want to have the most protective laws here in Tennessee that the court will allow.
That the court will allow. That's right. Now see, there's this, and I confess my own failure. If I had understood that we had such a strong belief in what many call the myth of judicial supremacy, I would have addressed that. I would say, get over that. The Supreme Court didn't even record all of its written opinions until 1834. An opinion is not the same thing as the Constitution. Otherwise, we left lots of the Constitution laying on somebody's table here, and oral opinions weren't always even reduced to writing. So the idea that an opinion is equal to the Constitution is clearly a myth. It denies that the nature of what a court does is it enters a judgment to resolve a dispute between particular people, and it does not make the law for everybody.
Can you imagine if you went back to the early 1800s and went to a state legislative body and said, hey, hang on a minute, while you guys are drafting this policy, let's make sure we march on down to the Supreme Court and see if this is okay.
Yeah. And let's give them 10 options to pick from.
So they can pick the one they like.
So they can pick the one they want.
Yeah. That's exactly what a sitting senator here in Tennessee just said about our law.
Yeah.
That they're
and I don't say that to make fun of him. I don't, because that's what they're all doing. It's what the governor's doing. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, he's not alone in this.
Because we believe certain things, we make those kinds of statements that we want to have as pro-life a law as the court will allow us, and we're not willing to fight to get our prerogative back to make the laws that we think are best. And people would say to me, "Yeah, but David, but the Constitution is the supreme law." And I'd say, "Yes, you're right. The Constitution is the supreme law. Court opinions are not law in the same sense as the Constitution. And where there are distinctions, they are important." Now, I think the governor's attorney made sort of the same statement, didn't he?
Yeah, this is Lang Wiseman. Yeah. He's what would his official title? Is he general counsel?
I think he's to the chief of staff and general counsel, something like that.
Yeah,
but,
to the governor.
I don't really know.
And he's primarily,
but he's an attorney.
Yeah. And he's primarily been the one sort of leading the charge on getting this bill drafted, from my understanding.
Yeah.
So here we go.
This layered approach is the layers are designed to correspond to certain gestational age milestones and are designed to allow our state to play both the long game and the short game. The long game being that this approach would allow us to test the limits of current Supreme Court precedent while also allowing us to achieve, in one instance, to achieve the most protective provisions under state law that a court would approve.
So I've got more, but I want to pause there. I
Okay.
mean, almost the exact same statement verbatim
Yeah.
as
We
Sarah.
want to get as good as we can, the short game.
Yeah.
Well, actually, he says we want to test the limits. How far can we go? And we're going to get as much as we can get. That's and
As much as the court will let us have.
as much as the court, yeah. And now the point would be, now you're not arguing that we have the prerogative to make these laws. You're arguing that we want to test the limits of how far we think we can go that the court might let us have. So again, you're willing to concede to the court more authority than at least I'm willing to concede. Now, different lawyers have different views. They think Supreme Court's sort of God, that they make the law, their opinions are equivalent. You know, great, that's what they do. But we need to understand as pro-life people that certain understandings of the court, opinions, the Constitution, the nature of the judicial power lead to certain conclusions and certain kinds of legislation. Other understandings lead to different views. That's the difference between the Rule of Law Life Act and the governor's laddered approach. One group has more of a belief that the Supreme Court just, that's what we do, and we're just going to test the limits, and we're going to give 10 different places and see which one they like best. And then we'll have the best law we can get, and maybe some year the court will reverse Roe and we can do better. But until now, we're going to let them keep making these policy decisions. Now, I want to address something here, and maybe we'll get off the track of where we were. But the Supreme Court in United States versus Casey told the states what they wanted. And I've tried to say this in my own words, but sometimes it's just better than me trying to explain what God's word says. Just read the Bible to somebody and let it make its own case. And people don't understand this. This is not understood. I read it to a couple of legislators the other day, and they said, oh. So I'm going to read this, and I'm going to kind of read it and comment as we go through.
And where's this from?
This
again?
is from the Supreme Court's case of Casey, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the 1992 case. That's the case where we thought we had 7 votes to reverse Roe and Casey.
And we got 4.
And we got 4. and they reaffirmed it on the basis that we're not going to overturn a precedent that's 20-something years old. Now, why did they say we're not going to do that? Here's what they said. Wherein the performance, this is a quote, performance of its judicial duties, the court decides a case in such a way as to resolve the sort of intensely divisive controversy reflected in Roe and those rare comparable cases. And it talks about Brown versus Board of Education, separate but equal, and integrating schools. Its decision has a dimension that the resolution of the normal case does not carry. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. It is the dimension present whenever the court's interpretation of the Constitution calls for the contending sides of a national controversy to end their division by accepting, quote, a common mandate rooted in the Constitution. Now, what are they saying? We have lawsuits up here all the time where the railroad company's suing the Federal Trade Commission, or the radio stations suing the Federal Telecommunications System. And it's really important for certain groups of people. But there are some cases like separate but equal, Brown versus Board of Education, certain cases like Dred Scott, certain cases like abortion, that where the controversy is raging nationwide and it affects everybody, not some little niche of people. And we are called to what does he say? To resolve that kind of case. That's a whole different kettle of beans now when you come up here to me on that. But for us to to call the contending sides to end their division, we have to find a common mandate rooted in the Constitution. Now, what is he saying here? We all agree the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. So if we can say this decides the controversy because it's rooted in the Constitution, everybody will say, well, if that's what the Constitution says, we all agreed that that would be the supreme law. I guess we better stop arguing. That's what he's saying. So we're gonna resolve this controversy rather than say, this is a state-by-state controversy. Y'all figured out at your state capitol, you want to allow people to die on the delivery table? Go at it, New York and Virginia. Tennessee, we're not going to do that. They could have said that, but they said, no, we're going to resolve this controversy. We're going to pick a side. But if we're going to pick a side, we have to root it in the Constitution so we'll look legitimate, not like being politicians. Okay? Next paragraph. Only the most convincing justification. Okay, you got to give me something really, really good here. Under accepted standards of precedent. Are you showing me a court case or a constitutional provision in which you're saying I messed up? He said, so only the most convincing under accepted standards of precedent could suffice to demonstrate that a later decision, the one we're hoping would come, maybe this summer, let's say, overruling the first, was anything but a surrender to political pressure and an unjustified repudiation of the principle that we first articulated. So what they're saying here is we don't want this to look like we changed our mind because of political pressure, because then we just look like another group of politicians. And we rooted our decision in the Constitution, hoping everybody to accept it. So unless you can root something in the Constitution and precedents that establish that I got it messed up according to the Constitution, I'm not changing my mind.
Yeah.
Because I won't look legitimate. So he says, so to overrule under fire in the absence of the most compelling reason to re-examine a watershed decision would subvert the court's legitimacy beyond any serious question. And see, the court's only power is its power of legitimacy. Think about it with your kids. You have a certain power over your kids because they're little. When they get to be 16, they don't think you have so much power. When they leave home, you have no power. So he says we only have the power of our authority and our legitimacy. And when it looks like we're just playing politics and you haven't asked us the right question, that's what Clarence Thomas was saying, and you've not given me law or constitutional precedents to say, now I'm rooting my new decision in the Constitution, I'm not going to change my mind. And you see, that's exactly what Chuck Schumer was fussing about earlier this week when he said, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, if you reverse this abortion case, you won't know what hit you. Now, I think our good friend Steve Deace was correct. Judges, if you want to play politics, expect to get roughed up like in politics.
That's right.
You're playing politics over here. You're weighing all these decisions like a legislative body would do and coming out with some ruling and sticking it in the Constitution.
That's right. So when another politician comes at you, well, suck it up.
But here's, I think, what he's also saying. And everybody knows that in June Medical versus G, the case that you were hearing that day, they did not ask you to overturn Roe versus Wade. That question, you didn't even ask them to ask. You didn't ask them to address it. And if you go reverse Roe versus Wade, when the state didn't ask you to, and when you said you didn't even want them to argue that, you will look illegitimate. And that will scare John Roberts to death. If he reverses and they reverse when nobody even asked them to.
This case is not about Roe v. Wade.
It's not about Roe versus Wade. And some people want you to think it is, but nobody says it is. I had constitutional law professors saying, no, they're not going to reverse Roe versus Wade on this case, but they're not going to do it on the governor's case either.
I mean, we've got to weigh what's happening. I mean, as much as we want and pro-life people want, conservatives want Roe v. Wade to be overturned, and we should.
Yeah.
God forbid that the court overturn Roe v. Wade just because they want to.
Yeah.
It better be because someone brought them a constitutional argument
right.
that put them in a position to overturn.
Sure. How would you think if all of a sudden, like we had all these people down here on constitutional carry, if all of a sudden the Supreme Court changed its gun rulings when nobody asked them to?
Yeah.
You would be furious. You just acted like a bunch of political people that just because all of a sudden Thomas died and Alito died and you appointed 2 more Ginsburgs, now all of a sudden my Second Amendment rights changed and nobody's even asked you to do it. You just took a case as an opportunity to change your jurisprudence. Conservatives would be furious.
Right.
So I don't want John Roberts to just say, you know, we're tired of doing this, having to weigh all this stuff. We're having to act like a legislative body. What do you think they thought they were doing in 73 and 1992?
It's precisely what they were doing.
They knew what they were doing, and they could have quit, and they didn't. And they said, because we've rooted this in the Constitution, dadgummit, now you got to give us a reason to suck it out of the Constitution. So here's the thing, and we'll conclude maybe with this. In Casey, the court said the controlling word is liberty. A woman has a certain liberty to make an abortion decision. They kind of backed off from right to abortion to make it sort of liberty. You know, I got the liberty to buy Coke and to choose between Coke and Pepsi. You got a liberty to make certain decisions that are intimate and familiar and personal and affecting your body and blah, blah, blah. Certain liberty. And the court said, but the state does have an interest in potential life when it could maybe be another person. So you potentially really are another person when you could survive outside the womb.
Yeah, so develop the
viability. So now there's sort of 2 people involved here, and the woman's liberty, it can be limited. But prior to that, we don't really have another constitutional person sort of almost here. So we're not going to limit the woman's liberty. Now, the court made up this understanding of liberty, but having made it up,
it's there now.
It's there. And so what they're saying is, give me a reason why I should reverse my understanding of liberty from viability to, well, if you don't abort the baby after a heartbeat, the odds are it will come to term. Well, that's always been true. Now, the odds may be better because of medical science, but when the Supreme Court decided Roe and decided Casey, they could have said, let's pick 12 weeks. Let's pick 10 weeks. Let's pick a heartbeat. Because, yeah, if you don't have an abortion, the odds are the baby will grow and become a person. They said, no. You got to get to the point where you're viable for the state to really have an interest in that. So if you don't give me precedent for why I misunderstood person or why I misunderstood liberty or why I misunderstood life, I'm not changing, because now I'll look arbitrary. I'll look illegitimate. You will read the governor's bill till you're blue in the face, and you will find not one precedent that argues that the court got the concept of liberty wrong. They just want you to restrict the liberty for scientific reasons, not because at a heartbeat the person is more person. There's just nothing there.
The court's made it clear they don't care what your reason is for attempting to restrict the woman's liberty under the limitation of 24 weeks.
That's right.
Within that pre-viability period, they don't care. It's established
that's
precedent
really,
in their book.
Yeah, that's what Clarence Thomas was saying when I quoted that. No, remember what he said when he turned it down. He said, even this gruesome purpose, if the purpose is to place a substantial obstacle in the path of abortion prior to viability, it's unconstitutional. I don't care about fetal pain. I don't care about how gruesome the procedure is. You can't have that substantial obstacle. You're preventing all abortions. Now, even with the partial birth abortion statute, where they said, okay, you can prohibit partial birth abortions, they said, well, there are still other abortion methods available. So it's okay to prohibit this one method. So, again, I'm not trying to disrespect anybody's heart or their intention. But the Supreme Court, in those things I quoted us, they told us, here's what I want from you. Clarence Thomas reiterated it last year. You have to present the right question to me. Don't give me one of this, throw all the stuff up on the wall and see if something will stick. That won't work. Even I won't vote to hear that case. You have to give me a case that is so narrow, so specific, that I can't not, if I hear it, I may not hear it, but I can't not re-examine Roe and Casey. That's what he said. Give me a case that requires me to do it, that I can't fudge around and do something else. But I'm going to need precedent. I'm going to need another constitutional mandate because we still have a divisive controversy, don't we? Yeah, it didn't end it. So I'm going to have to change the way I decided this controversy by rooting it in the Constitution with something else in the Constitution. Give it to me. You didn't do that.
So we're
going to keep fighting.
Well, we're going a little long, and that's
Yeah,
fine
yeah.
because I want to do one more thing. I want to close the loop on what we know so far on SB 2196 because I just think it's critical for anyone who will listen to this podcast to know what we'll be left with. We've got three major things happening in this bill, one of which we've discussed at length, the fetal heartbeat, the 6-week, the 8-week, 10, 12, for all the way every week, just about up until 24 weeks.
Right.
That will not, there's no precedent whatsoever in any state, anywhere, any ruling that shows that any of that will survive. The court has struck down every law that has attempted to limit abortion by any measure
Prior to viability.
Period.
Period.
It doesn't matter why. It doesn't matter if it's D&E. It doesn't matter why. So that's gone. We already know that. I mean, no one who writes laws does not know this.
That's a substantial obstacle.
It's substantial. Okay. The second thing it does is the eugenics part that Senator Lundberg mentioned. It tries to limit abortions by sex, race, and Down syndrome. Again, zero precedent. I can't remember which state it was.
Indiana passed one.
There's one that has been upheld only because
I didn't think one had been upheld.
Oh, there is one that is in force only because it specifically says that it does this, it does this, this, and this, except in the case of pre-viability.
Oh,
it only I've got it on my desk. Can't remember what state it was, but they passed a eugenics part of their bill, and the judge upheld that part specifically because it did not ban those types of abortions prior to viability.
Right.
I mean, the court has shown over and over and over again that it won't hold anything up. So
let me ask,
you can ban whatever you want past 24 weeks.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what you.
But now let me ask you this: how many women will probably know the sex of their baby before the 24th week?
All of them, just about.
Yeah. So we're going to run into the burning building to rescue these babies, and it's kind of like, well, they've probably already been aborted by 24 weeks, 22 weeks.
So that part is not going to work either, unless we rewrite, we amend it to not affect pregnancy's pre-viability. Then it would hold up.
And the court may sever it and say, well, we'll uphold it afterwards. But like I say, when it comes to sex selection or race, those issues way before viability.
Yeah.
I mean, the person who hadn't already had their abortion then has just not been paying attention.
So here's what we'll be left with. He mentioned, Mr. Wiseman mentioned the ultrasound piece, and so I want to play this clip here.
Yeah.
Under existing law, if an ultrasound is performed, then the results of that ultrasound must be provided to the pregnant woman. This provision of the bill would make that mandatory, would require an ultrasound as part of that informed consent process in order to ensure that a pregnant woman is fully apprised of the pregnancy, the developments that are ongoing with the unborn child. And there would also be an allowance for the woman to refrain from having to hear the heartbeat or to look at the images, and certainly she would be able to avert her eyes and or ask that the volume be turned down when the fetal heartbeat is made audible to the woman. There's a specific exception for that.
So that's going to be our big win here in Tennessee, a mandated ultrasound that we can refuse the mandate on.
Well, it's not just that. The Sixth Circuit, when they upheld the Kentucky law like this, noted that the doctor is free to also tell the woman, you're not required to listen to or see anything. And here's my concern. When you're already at Planned Parenthood, what do you think that doctor's going to say? Would you like to see the ultrasound or hear the heartbeat? Not. He'll say, by law, I'm required to perform an ultrasound and make it available to you. And if we detect the heartbeat, I'm required by law to let you know you can hear it, but you're not required by law to actually have to hear or see anything. Now, how many women sitting there getting ready to have an abortion are going to want to be confused by that.
Sure.
No, it's, you know,
In their defense, certainly not. If
yeah,
you're
I'm
there
not
to
blaming
do the
wo-
thing,
I'm not going to blame the woman. Now, here's the other question. So what if it's in the informed consent law? You know, we have a law where you're supposed to tell women certain things about maternity and pregnancy and delivery and fetal development and alternatives, you know, that you can provide for adoption, and there are services to help you parent. You know, we put all that in a consent form. What if Planned Parenthood buries in the consent form? Think if you've ever gotten a loan at the bank, you know, and you want to read all this stuff. Would you sign that you've read all this stuff? How many people sit there and read all those, bank loan documents? You want to buy the house, you want to buy the car, you're going to sign the paper. You're not going to say, well, I don't like this part. Well, they'll say, well, that's fine. I'm sure you can go down the street and find another bank. It'll probably have the same thing in it, but that's okay. You can go. So what if they put that in there? It says, by law, we are required to perform an ultrasound to make that image available to you and to oscillate the heartbeat so that you can hear it. But you are not required to listen or to see anything. And by signing this consent form, you acknowledge that you do not need to see or hear anything. Now, could that go in the form? I don't know, but I don't see why it couldn't. And then she says, well, I want an abortion. I sign it. So the doctor never says anything. Does she read that form and really understand it? I don't know. So I get that these things could really save lives if women actually solve them. But we're conceding we can't make them see or hear anything. The other thing that needs to be appreciated, well, maybe that'll be the case that will reverse Roe versus Wade. Maybe that part. No. What people don't understand is that the Sixth Circuit upheld that law because it was a First Amendment claim by the doctor, not an abortion claim by the woman.
because it's a different constitutional claim.
That's right. The doctor was saying this is government-compelled speech. I have to start telling the woman and doing all this stuff, and that violates my First Amendment right. Had nothing to do with abortion. The reason it didn't have anything to do with abortion because the woman wasn't required to see or hear anything. So it didn't affect her rights. So that part of the case will never lead the court to reconsider Roe and Casey because it's a First Amendment case.
Has nothing to do with the 14th Amendment.
It has nothing to do with 14th. So we just need people to understand what they're getting and what they're not getting so that they're not disappointed and then despairing when later we lose and they say, well, what can we do? And say, well, we could have done something differently. But now we'll have to wait a few years because we shot our gun too early. We shot it in the wrong direction.
But potential, look,
I don't-
possibly another generation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
I mean,
So that's why, like I said, I kind of crawled up in my bed on my hands and knees and my head down on the mattress because I thought, if this continues, it'll have to be done by another state. Now, Alabama, I admit, is trying to do it. They're not doing it the same way we're doing it, but they're trying to do it. God bless them. They're in the 11th Circuit. It'd be nice if we gave the 6th Circuit a chance to do the same thing because then the Supreme Court might say, well, we've had 2 circuits address this question. Now we need to hear it.
yeah.
So anyway, it's been a long thing, and I know I shared sort of my heart at the beginning and not the law, but friends, don't despair. God's on his throne.
David, thanks
we may
for
be
your-
like Abraham. We won't get or
won't get
Moses.
to see
We won't
God.
get to see the
I
promised
hope
land.
not.
Yeah. But anyway,
but
that's where
if
we
that's
are.
but if that's the Lord's plan, that's what it is.
It is. Yeah.
David, thanks for your insight, and hey, thanks. I know everyone's thinking this. I mean, thank you for that. I don't know if I'm with you every day. I don't know that I always, because I haven't known you for 30 years.
Yeah.
I don't know if I always appreciate the history behind what you've done and the fight that you've been in for
A long time.
a long time.
25
So,
years. Yeah.
I know we all appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Thank y'all for listening. We'd love to hear your comments, questions, ideas. You can email us at info@factin.org. David, you got
And share this podcast with your other pro-life friends.
Yes.
Because they're probably wanting to know what's going on and not. We're getting a lot of comments about it. So share this particular one.
Yeah, well, this will be episode 16, and even last week on episode 15 when we really talked about the Missouri bill. I mean, 15 and 16, these are really 2 key podcasts to share with anyone who is fighting the fight in the pro-life arena. It's some good information that I think would enlighten anyone interested in this topic.
Yeah.
So again, that's info@factin.org, factn.org. And yeah, definitely share with friends, subscribe, and thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. God, Law, and Liberty is a podcast of the Family Action Council of Tennessee. We are a 100% supporter-funded nonprofit advocating for family, life, marriage, and religious liberty. For more information, please visit us at www.facttennessee.org. That's FACTennessee.org. And please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FactTennessee.